All Things Strange podcast. I am your host, Agent Anderson. Come along as we examine UFO sightings, conspiracies, and all things strange. You can find all of our wonderful links in the description on the Linktree, where you can find our Discord, our Patreon, our merchandise, and more. This week's episode, UFO Crash Retrievals. Yeah, a little late on that one. Whoops. Oops. All right, UFO Crash Retrievals. We were supposed to do St. Joseph, the St. Joseph UFO Crash Retrieval 1947. That's what people voted upon. Apologies, I thought I had information on that one. Turns out I spent an entire week trying to find information on it, and I found almost nothing. Definitely not enough to do a whole episode on, but I don't want to let you guys down, those of you who voted on this topic, so instead, I will do several UFO crash retrievals, sort of a shorter version of many cases, and then some of these cases, we don't have very much information, so it's just a short thing, and that's it. A lot of these cases, we could do an entire episode on, and we have on certain crash retrievals in the past, like Shag Harbor, I think is probably my favorite. I think that one has really good evidence. And there's, or the Kecksburg one also has really good evidence, multiple witnesses, all that stuff. Something came down, something was retrieved. We just don't know what it is. So we've done episodes on this before. And this time around, it's going to be shorter ones instead of focusing on one case in its entirety. Before we get started, we have 2 tiers of patronage for you. The first tier will get you early access, bonus episodes, after hours, and it comes in at a measly, scrawny, underweight $3 a month. That's right, you get all of that. And for the main show, I do 2 episodes a month, so I do it bi-weekly. But for the bonus episodes, I do it every week, depending. Some weeks, either I'm sick, or I'm out of town, or I'm otherwise indisposed, so I do miss a week once in a while, but most of the time I do 1 episode a week for the bonus episodes. All right, now that we got that out of the way, one more thing I wanted to mention. If you'd like to contact the show, check out our Discord. It's on the Linktree. Maybe I'll start putting the link in the description as well. That's where you can contact the show. I don't really check the emails anymore. I don't know. It's just, there's too much stuff all over the place to check, and I lose track of certain things. But I am on Discord pretty regularly, so if you do want to have a comment or a question or anything at all, sign up for a Discord. It's free. You just got to click a button, and you can use either the Discord app on desktop or on phone, Android or Apple, or you can use the browser version. For desktop, I've found the browser version to be better and more stable. I've tried the desktop application or program. We used to call them programs, but hey, whatever. I guess you got to be cool. You got to be a cool kid these days and call it an application. Anyways, I found that for desktop, the browser version is more stable and works better, but it's, that was years ago that I tried that, so maybe it's been updated. Anyways, check us out on Discord. Come on in and say hello. All right, now let's get to it. UFO Crash Retrievals. The first one I want to mention is from Aurora, Texas in April 1897. I'm sure we've mentioned this one on the show before. This case is so familiar. It's like, I feel like, did I do an episode on this before? I don't know. I'm sure we've talked about it though, because, I've done, over 200 episodes. And then I don't even know how many hundreds, probably like at least 150 bonus episodes and other miscellaneous items. At some point, I've done so many episodes and read about so many of these topics that I kind of lose track of which ones I've done and which ones I haven't. So sometimes I have to look back and search my own podcast feed to see if I've covered something. And then other cases, like for instance, the very first episode I did was the 1966 swamp gas case. I think I'd like to revisit that one. I I did it in a certain way. I was trying to integrate sound effects and all this other stuff, but there's so much to that case. I feel like I could do a multi-parter and still not cover all of it. But all right, let's get to Aurora, Texas, April 1897. This is a very early crash retrieval. I don't know if it's the first, but it's certainly older than most of the other ones we're aware of. So April 17th, 1897, in the small farming town of Aurora, Texas, which if you're going to crash a UFO, the small town of Aurora, the small farming town of Aurora, perfect place to do it. We have another one. We have one other case I'm going to get to that has a perfect name for the crash retrieval, but this one, perfect name. Now, at this time, this was during the airship wave. This is a UFO report. Did I do an episode on that? I don't know. I won't go on that tangent again. But there was, in the 1800s, there was this rash of airship sightings. Some of these sightings could absolutely be explained possibly by people experimenting with, blimps or dirigibles or hot air balloons or whatever. I believe that's probably the case for some of these, but there are some weird ones. Just looking through UFO crash retrievals, whenever I do these searches, I come across all sorts of stuff that's not necessarily related to the show. And there are many, many airship sighting cases. You could probably do 10 episodes on airships if you wanted to. There's a lot. So anyways, this case happened during the airship flap, I guess, if you want to call it that. I guess it's also known as the Great Airship Wave of 1896 to 1897. Around 6 p.m., residents of Aurora claimed to see an airship flying erratically over town. The craft struck a windmill on the property of a local judge, J.S. Proctor. It exploded and scattered debris across the field. The impact also destroyed the judge's garden and water tank. Aw, so sad. When the people got there to look at the wreckage, they found the body of a small humanoid that was, quote, not of this world, according to a local newspaper. They held a funeral for the being, and they buried it at the Aurora Cemetery. And there was a grave marker for it, which was later vandalized and stolen. There's a lot, like, you could probably do 20 minutes just on the grave marker. That's how much controversy there is around this case. So there's also some versions of the story where people claim the debris, some metal debris was buried with the body. Unfortunately, the town will not allow anybody to exhume this grave. And let's be real. 1897, if there was an alien body there, the government would have already exhumed it anyways, right? But people have focused on this grave, and I think it was UFO Hunters, if I remember correctly. They did a show about the Aurora case where they actually went to that area where the grave was supposed to be. I believe by this point the grave marker was already gone, and they used like a scanner to scan the ground to see what was under there, but they weren't allowed to dig it up. So whatever they found, I don't remember. I think they found that it looked like there was something there, but they weren't really sure what it was. But without digging it up, it's all just speculation anyways. Now, the main source of information for this case is the April 19th, 1897 issue of the Dallas Morning News, and it was written by a dude named S.E. Hayden, Haydon, if you guys want to try to find that article for yourself. It described all the events, including the crash and the alien body and the burial, and that's where we get most of our information from. I find it really interesting that they held a funeral for the alien. And it does make sense because I guess if you're Christian, or I'm assuming they're Christian, if they're Christian, then it would make sense that they would, want to have the blessings and things and save this person from outer space. They would treat them no differently than anybody else, I suppose, as far as that goes. Now, there were later investigations of this. For example, Bill Case from MUFON investigated this story. And during this time, they found a cemetery record referring to an alien grave, but by this time the grave marker was already gone, and the Cemetery Association refused to allow them to dig it up. They did find metal fragments in the area, but they were aluminum, and we're talking, almost, what is this, like 80 years later or something? So there could be all sorts of metal debris on a farm that's been around that long. There could be all sorts of pieces of metal lying around. Have you guys ever been to a farm? They got all kinds of metal and machinery and all kinds of stuff. So it's not outside the realm of, or it's not outside the realm of possibility that they could definitely have something there, just metal laying around. It was aluminum, so it's not anything crazy. There have been other investigations of this case, lots of them, for instance, UFO hunters. But at the end of the day, it happened so long ago that we don't really know what the real situation was. We don't know the reality of the situation. It could have been made up. There was a thing in the newspapers, I believe it was called yellow journalism, where they would write fake stories that would be understood to have been fake during the time. On the other hand, there was an airship wave or flap at the time. So this could be one of those things flying around that happened to crash. It could have been an experimental airship that somebody was trying to build and sell to the military. Who knows? There's a lot of different possibilities for this case. And without doing a deep dive into it, it's hard to have a strong opinion one way or another. But I would definitely like to do a longer version of this case at some point, if I haven't already. I don't know. I feel like I have not done this case yet. All right, so I felt like I had to do one of the famous cases just to sort of whet our appetite. But the rest of these cases are not well-known cases. From here on out, we're not going to talk about any Roswells or any Shag Harbor or anything like that, because those cases, they're so popular in the realm of ufology that I feel like everybody's familiar with them. Unless you're just stumbling across this show randomly, I'm assuming that you're familiar with those cases, at least to a small degree. And if not, we've done some of them. So go, like I said, go look back at our podcast feed and you'll find some UFO Crash Retrievals. All right, let's get to some lesser known stuff that I'm hoping none of you have heard of, because a little bit more exciting that way. North of Georgia, 1942. This one comes from the famous researcher Leonard Stringfield, who has a series of UFO crash retrieval publications. They are expensive. I was not able to find copies of them specifically, but I did find other people referencing them. So that's how I know about this stuff. Maybe someday I'll keep my eye out at yard sales and eBay auctions, right? Anyways, Mary Nunn worked for the military during World War II in a key civil capacity. This was not her real name. Apparently it's an alias for obvious reasons. She reported that a 15-foot wide and 10-foot high round saucer crashed and was retrieved by the military. She said there were living occupants with bug eyes, no hair, and milky white skin. After it was crashed, the UFO was moved to an unspecified location, and all of the occupants reportedly died shortly after they crashed. And that's it. We don't have much more to go on for that one. It could just be a fun story that somebody made up on a lark. We've covered that before. For instance, the cattle abduction that was actually just the result of a Liars Club competition, which is, man, that's pretty wild stuff. But you never know with these stories. Some of these don't have good evidence, but that doesn't make them bad stories. They're still interesting stories. All right, next up, San Antonio, New Mexico, 1945, also known as the Trinity case. San Antonio at the time was a really small town, and it's only 20 miles north of the Trinity site where a nuclear bomb was tested in July of 1945. That's why it's also known as the Trinity case. Reme Baca, R-E-M-E, Reme, it looks like these are Hispanic friends and probably of Mexican heritage, and I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. So if you know how to pronounce R-E-M-E and, as a Spanish name, let me know. I don't know. I know Jose is Jose, not Jose, but my skills in language is very limited. Anyways, Reme Baca and Jose Padilla, maybe I'll just call them Baca and Padilla. Padilla? I think it's Padilla. Anyways, those two friends, they were boys at the time, and they were out and about on one of their parents' ranches. I guess they were farmers. Found the remains of a crashed UFO around August 20th. So 1 month later, give or take, after the Trinity site UFO test. Here's a quote from one of the witnesses. "The first thing we saw was a kind of giant-sized gouge, like when a road grader goes in with a blade, about 100 feet wide, deeper than a foot, and a good football field long. It was scary. The gouge crossed this old road. Jose pulled out his binoculars, and through them he could see that the gouge ran into a ridge and then stopped. We could see that there was something there, an object that had dug itself into the sandy soil. The dust and the heat were unbearable. We retreated briefly, then returned, worried that there might be casualties in the wreckage. Jose convinced me that everything was going to be all right. He led the way. I followed. I asked if it might be an airplane. Jose said, "I don't think so." Things got eerie as we began examining the remnants at the periphery of a huge litter field. I picked up a piece of thin, shiny material that reminded me of the tinfoil in the old olive green Philip Morris cigarette packs, the brand my mom smoked at the time. And I've never seen that particular pack. That must be pretty old. Something specific to the 40s, maybe. I've known lots of smokers, but I've never seen a olive green Philip Morris cigarette pack. Maybe it's menthol? I don't know. Anyways, it was folded up and lodged underneath a rock. When I freed it, it unfolded all by itself. I refolded it, and it spread itself out again. Sounds familiar. Sounds a lot like one of the witnesses from the Roswell case, but let's not take any diversions in that direction. We finally worked our way to within yards of the wreckage, fearing the worst and not quite ready for it. It was tough walking through there. We were short guys. I had my hand over my face, peeking through my fingers. Jose, being older, seemed able to handle it better. Jose described what he saw through his binoculars. 3 strange-looking creatures, moving fast, seemingly under stress, shadowy, almost as if they could will themselves from one position to another. They seemed not to be able to hold their balance. We were 100 to 200 feet from them. Sounds were coming out of the object, like a jackrabbit in pain or like a baby crying, really sad. Jose wanted to go closer. I wanted no part of it. Jose wasn't afraid of much, but I told him we should get out of there. I just had this feeling. We could see that there was a very large piece missing from the craft, and pieces of metal were scattered around several hundred feet. It was getting late, so we backtracked. It was dark when we reached the Padilla home. Jose's dad got a brief report on the object, and the hombecitos, little guys, and this is Rem Baca, that's some of his testimony there. So I guess this was on Jose's father's ranch. The father's name was Faustino, and he believed that it was something belonging to the military, and he didn't seem all that concerned or worried about it. 2 days after the crash, Faustino's friend, who was a police officer, came to the Padilla home. The kids led Faustino and the officer, Eddie Apodaca, to the area where the wreckage was. They drove as far as they could, but the car couldn't go all the way, so they hiked the rest of the way. When they got to an area on an overlook, they were surprised to see the wreckage wasn't there anymore. They went down to the crash site anyways to investigate, and suddenly, as if by magic, the object reappeared. The scattered debris was not there anymore, but the main object was. The adults climbed into the craft, while the kids were told to stay outside. When they came back out, they looked spooked. They told the kids not to tell anybody about what they had seen, and said that it might cause trouble for their families. They went home, and about 2 days after this, so about 4 days after the crash, or at least the boys finding the crash, a recovery operation arrived to take the UFO away. Sergeant Avila asked for permission to take down some of the fence in Faustino's property so that they could get to the wreckage. That's one of the people that came to retrieve the crash from the Air Force or whoever, Sergeant Avila. And they actually asked for permission, which is unusual, right? You wouldn't think that. But hey, this was 1940s, so maybe at that time the government was a little more polite. He said it was an experimental weather balloon and that they needed to get it back. The children were told to stay away from the area, but of course they didn't. They observed the military with their binoculars, and the military was grading a road in the area to get like a truck there or something, and they were also removing smaller scraps of debris. The kids said that the military people were throwing debris down into a crevice. Other people were covering them with dirt, and it sounds like they kind of didn't want to bother with this, so they were trying to just get rid of it as quickly as possible. And if that's the case, and if you could find this exact location, you might be able to find a piece of UFO. So they finished the road, which it didn't say in where I read, but I get the impression it was like a dirt road, because if they finished it quickly, they definitely weren't pouring concrete or asphalt. They drove a flatbed truck to the UFO and loaded it up. It was prepared to be taken away, but apparently they left it unguarded overnight. There are some details in here that kind of make me go, that's one detail that I find a little unbelievable, that the military would have crashed alien technology and would leave it unguarded so that the children could sneak in and check it out. I don't know. I'm sorry, guys. I don't know about that. But on the other hand, it was in a very remote area, so maybe they didn't think it was worth expending the resources to leave guards there 24/7, especially if it was in a remote area. And they talked to the father, Faustino, and Faustino said, yes, I will tell the kids, don't go out there. And it's so remote of an area that nobody else is going to go out there either. So I guess that doesn't necessarily disprove the story, but it does have my spidey senses tingling. So anyways, they left it overnight. The boys snuck over to the object, and Jose went inside the hole on the side of the object. He had a pipe with him that he found nearby, I guess. You know, like I said, on farms, there's just metal things lying around all over the place. So he grabbed a pipe, and he wedged off a foot-long piece of metal. He said it looked something like a sundial. It was very light and cold. The boys left and went home. The next day, the soldiers took the UFO away, probably to the nearby White Sands Proving Grounds, and then who knows where else after that. The piece that they took has apparently been analyzed, and it's apparently aluminum silicate with unusually high carbon. I don't know. So that's like the short version of this case. It's interesting. If they have this object, then that could be proof, if they still have it in their possession today, which I believe they do, that could be proof of a UFO or extraterrestrial craft having crashed there. Skeptics say that the case is an obvious hoax, which, you know, I can't necessarily rule out. Let's be real here. I'm not going to pretend like something is real if it's not. It's a really interesting story. They wrote a book about it, which is not necessarily a problem. If I had a strange encounter and a publisher said, we will give you this amount of money to publish a book about it, hey man, I'm not Bill Gates over here, so I'd probably take the money. You know what I mean? So telling your story is not necessarily something to disprove the story. On the other hand, they didn't come out with this story publicly until the early 2000s, sometime around when they published the book. So that is a little maybe suspicious. I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on this one way or another because I haven't done a deep dive. If I was to look into this one deeper and read the book or whatever, it would probably become a little more clear whether or not it was a hoax. But as it is, we're just doing the short version, so we'll just have to leave it at that. It's a fun story. It's a probably interesting case, but we don't know for sure what's actually happening here. There were a surprising number of crash retrieval cases from 1947. Like when I couldn't find anything on St. Joseph, I was thinking, well, crap, what am I going to do? Should I do Roswell? Should I do something else? Like there's not that many crash retrievals. Oh boy, was I wrong. There are so many crash retrievals that, as I always say, I could do multiple episodes on this if I wanted. If I wanted to do short versions of crash retrievals, I could probably do like 10 of these episodes at least. There's so many of these things. In 1947, there were a surprising number of crash retrieval cases. I'm only going to do a couple of them, but I didn't count the numbers that I found, but it's probably like 10 or 15 or something. Like there's a ton of crash retrievals from 1947. All right, so let's get to the next one. Arizona. January 1947, at the Papagos Indian Reservation. There are two anonymous witnesses who were friends. One of them had Navy experience or was from the Navy at the time, and the other was from the Army. And they were off duty scouting the area for property. They wanted to build a house or something there. Around 5 p.m., they found Air Force personnel who told them to stop and show them identification, and asked them why they were out there. They could also see other military personnel about a quarter-mile away further down the dirt road that they were driving on. They were a quarter-mile away, the personnel, not the people driving, were near a disc-shaped object embedded in the sand. It had a dome on top and was approximately 30 feet in diameter and 18 feet high. There were two rings on its outer edge that seemed to have windows between them. So I'm thinking kind of like two plates put together but separated a little bit with windows between them, like two rims. I don't know. That's kind of what I'm picturing there. There was no truck, crane, or any other equipment on scene, leading the witnesses to believe that they had shown up to the crash disk recently, that the military had. And that's it. That's the short version. There's not a whole lot of information available for this one. Just a mention, the Maury Island incident was in 1947, and I'm sure we did a case on that one. That's a really interesting case. Ruppelt talks about it in his book. Happened in 1947. Fun case, one that's got evidence, pros and cons about it. Maybe it's a hoax, maybe it's not. I don't know. Listen to our case file and we'll go over it in detail. But I just wanted to mention that as a famous case. And there's Roswell, and there's, I think, Aztec, New Mexico. Was the Aztec crash, was that 1947 or 1948? I don't know. But there's a lot of them around this time. Anyways, the next one I want to do is Kiev, Ukraine. Sometime in the summer of 1947. Kiev had suffered heavy damage during World War II and was still at this point in the process of being rebuilt. Workers were digging up stuff and they found a buried object. It was silvery, seamless, streamlined cylinder, arrow-shaped, and about 3 to 3.5 meters in diameter and about 5 to 6 meters long. Inside were two small chairs and equipment that looked sophisticated. How could it be both arrow-shaped and a streamlined cylinder? That's kind of a weird description, right? I don't know. A military team came and took the object away, and according to a Russian UFO researcher, Anton Anfilov, the object was buried for over 5,000 years. I don't know how they would know that, but that's what it said. Russia attempted to reverse engineer the technology, also according to Anton, the UFO researcher from Russia. So that's all we have for the short version of this case. I wonder if you dug deeper, if you could find more information about this one. I don't know. It's certainly a tantalizing mystery, and if you look at the time, if you look at the USSR, not just Russia, but the USSR, that government had control over an extremely large chunk of real estate on the earth. So if you're just going to average it out and say, okay, let's say that X number of UFOs crash, well, Russia's going to get a decent percentage of them because they have so much land, right? I don't know. So it's interesting, but I might have to learn Russian to investigate it further. I don't know. Fun case. All right, next up, Guadalupe, Mexico, 1947. A document was found by Nick Redfern and Ryan Wood in the declassified files of the White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. The files are in the National Archives in Maryland. The document reads, 17th October 1947, Director of Research and Development Office, Deputy Chief of Staff, Materiel. Unknown missile in Mexico. Investigation of the unknown missile, which landed near Guadalupe on 12th of October 1947, has failed, so far to identify it as a V-2, GAPA, G-A-P-A, or other type of guided missile. Careful check by the USAF, Ordnance, and Navy indicates that no missiles were fired from Alamogordo Special Range or White Sands Proving Ground on 12th of October 1947. Army ground forces have eliminated the possibility of an anti-aircraft target having gone astray. And just a side note, man, there seems to be an awful lot of weird stuff happening around the White Sands Proving Ground, right? Ton of stuff. Negotiations with the Mexican government for the long-range proving ground for guided missiles, which have been started through the State Department, may be jeopardized if Mexico is dissatisfied with the investigation. Yeah, Mexico's like, hey, you guys are landing missiles on our land. We are not cool with that. It is understood that the newspaper statements that fragments of a V2 have been found, identified, are disturbing the Mexican government. Yeah, I would be disturbed too if I was in the Mexican government. There weren't a whole lot of missiles at the time, and if this was a missile launched by the US government, somebody would know what it was or where it came from. In this document, they're saying that it's unidentified. It's a really interesting document, and there's a potential that it could be a crashed UFO, but there really isn't enough information to know one way or another. We don't have any witnesses. We don't have any corroborating stories. All we have is this document. But if we take a positive slant, then we could easily argue that it was not something from our government because they were unable to identify it. And since the Mexican government was upset about it, it wasn't theirs either. And I find it unlikely that in 1947, the Russians or whoever were already launching missiles over our land. Like, they wouldn't do that. That would start a war. It doesn't make any sense. So I think there is a good chance that this could be a crashed UFO. However, a skeptic could probably come up with all sorts of explanations, like some kind of experimental airplane, a weather balloon, a mirage of cannabis, or whatever, It could be a terrestrial object. We just don't have enough information to say. But it is a really, really obscure case that I'm guessing nobody listening has ever heard of. That's the kind of stuff I like to talk about sometimes. All right, let's fast forward a little bit here. This is a little blurb that is once again brought to us from the famous UFO researcher Leonard Stringfield. Quote, "My information for one known UFO crash incident in 1952 comes from a reliable person in a technical position at a large General Electric plant. His brother was on duty as a radar specialist at Edwards Air Force Base, California in 1952 when he saw a UFO descending toward Earth at a great speed. When the UFO had been confirmed to have crashed, the captain on duty gave him instructions. Quote, 'You didn't see anything.'" And that's from Leonard Stringfield's UFO Ohio Yearbook 1979. Why Ohio? I don't know. That's just a quote. I didn't find that whole publication, just the quote from it. So it's interesting, but we don't have a whole lot to go on here. It's still interesting, though. What could it be? What could it be? Or is that... No. What was the quote? I'm thinking of Nightmare Before Christmas. Man, I need to watch that again. It's been a while. All right, 1952. We've done an episode on the 1952 UFO flap where there were literally UFOs flying over the White House. Here's a document from the AFOSI, Air Force Special Office of Special Investigations, and it's dated July 23rd, which coincides with the White House event, or July 22nd does, which is what they're talking about anyways. Here we go. 1. On 22 July 1952, Colonel Smith, Executive Officer, Directorate of Intelligence, USAF, advised that his office had just received a call from the above-captioned individual and that he was concerned over some object that had apparently fallen in a wooded area behind his home. According to Colonel Smith, Mr. Redacted resides on Lay Hill Road, Silver Spring, Maryland, and is employed by some Buick company in the Silver Spring area. Point number 2. Colonel Smith further stated that Mr. Redacted, not Agent Redacted, different than this show obviously, reported this incident to the local police on 19 July 1952. The date of the incident occurred, but having received no satisfaction, decided to call the Air Force on 22 July 1952. I telephonically communicated the above information to Colonel White, District Commander, DO Number 4. Gilbert R. Levy, Chief Counterintelligence Division, Director of Special Investigations, the Inspector General. Once again, this could be something, or it could be nothing. When it comes to highly classified information like crashed UFOs, you probably won't find a government document saying, we found a crashed flying saucer, other than the Roswell press release, I guess. But instead, you have to follow these little breadcrumbs like this. Now, again, there's not enough to go on here necessarily. This isn't proof of anything, but it's really interesting, really interesting. So, like point number one here, Colonel Smith advised that his office had just received a call from the above captioned individual and that he was concerned over some object that had apparently fallen in a wooded area behind his home. According to Colonel Smith, Mr. Redacted resides on Lay Hill Road, Silver Spring, Maryland. And that's it. That's all we have to go on here. So, I mean, at this time, it's plausible that you had somebody who built their own ultralight aircraft and they crashed it back there and then they were fine because it was a crash landing and they were going slow and low. It could be a military plane or object. It could be anything. This could be literally anything. So we don't necessarily can say that it's like an alien craft. On the other hand, it's a really interesting document. Okay. Also 1952, by the way, there's a bunch more of these in 1952 as well. 47 and 52 were definitely some huge years for UFO sightings and crashes, apparently. This one is from Las Vegas, Nevada. Viva Las Vegas. April 18th, 1952. A fast-glowing red object was witnessed over Oneida, New York. It was tracked on radar as it crossed over the United States from east to west. 2 Air Force bases, Luke Air Force Base in Arizona and Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, scrambled jet fighters. It was tracked on radar as it crossed the country, and the average speed of the object was 4,500 miles an hour. This rules out a man-made object because we did not have anything that could go that fast. In fact, as far as I'm aware, we still don't. But missiles and stuff maybe, but at this time we didn't have anything that could fly across the entire country at that speed. And it also rules out meteors because meteors are much, much faster than that. And I don't know, you'd have to ask an expert, ask an astronomer, but I don't think a meteor is going to go from New York all the way to the West Coast or whatever. It's going to go, just a part of that journey before it burns up. At Eureka, Utah, witnesses saw it land. They described it as a glowing orange oval, which emitted a low whirring sound. The local power station at the time experienced interruptions, which is not unusual for UFO sightings. After it landed, it rose up again and headed off towards Nevada. It was seen by witnesses east of Las Vegas, and then it disappeared from radar. Witnesses saw it explode near Mesquite, Nevada. At the time, it was being chased by jets from Nellis Air Force Base. Did they shoot it down? Or was it some kind of mechanical failure? We don't know. The incident was reported in newspapers far and wide, apparently. It'd be interesting to look up some of these papers, some of these articles, and see what they say. Did they quote witnesses directly? This could be a really interesting case to look into. On May 8th, Project Blue Book Chief Robert Friend and J. Allen Hynek were sent to investigate the incident. However, they did not go to Nevada. They went to Utah, which, okay, interesting. They went to Utah and came to the conclusion that it was a meteor. Strangely, Blue Book listed the case as 2 separate incidents. One for April 18th, multiple radar sightings at Nellis Air Force Base, which they classified as unidentified, and then they reclassified it as insufficient data. And remember, in 1962, they were far past the golden years of Ruppelt, where they actually investigated things. At this time, their main goal was to have an explanation for everything. And the second case was the one investigated by Hynek and Friend in Utah, and that one was explained as a meteor, which again, there's no way this was a meteor, right? Not a chance. And I just like that, it was investigated by Hynek and Friend, like Hynek and his friend, but it's actually just, no, that's the guy's name. Literally, the guy's name is Friend. Kevin Randall later on would investigate the case, and he actually interviewed some of the witnesses, both civilian and military. So there's a lot of interesting information out there about this case. One of the witnesses he interviewed was an Air Force lieutenant at Nellis Air Force Base at the time. The lieutenant, along with about 30 people, were driven out to the crash site to secure and clean the area. So that's like a very, very brief summary of this case. There is a lot more to it, and this would be a good one to investigate further for a whole case file, I think. It looks like there's a lot to this one. All right, next up, got to bring a good old case file from good old Australia, for those of you not from Australia. Victor Harbor, Australia, May 24, 1986. Around noon, dozens of witnesses saw an object the size of a family car crash in the aptly named... I told you we're going to have a case with another appropriate name for a UFO crash landing. Encounter Bay. What are the chances that a UFO is going to crash into Encounter Bay? That's pretty cool. So anyways, Encounter Bay in Victoria Harbor. This is on the southern coast of Australia, from what I can find anyways. Police Constable G.A. Clemow got reports from Beachport residents that saw a, quote, large smoke-colored vapor trail left by the object as it sped past at cloud height. Be interesting to look up the weather reports and see exactly how high the clouds were at that time. Neil Sutherland, a witness, was close to the object, and he described it as tubular with one red tail fin. Quote, it came from the northeast over land and headed downwards over the southeast towards the sea. It definitely looked like a big missile to me. Not a missile. Strangely, the RAAF and local police said that they had no plans to search for the downed object. And that's really strange because if it was like an airplane or something, wouldn't you want to go check for survivors? Wouldn't you want to recover the airplane so you can figure out what made it crash in the first place, so that if there was a mechanical problem, you could fix other models of that particular airplane? Who knows? But it's really weird that the Air Force and the police wanted nothing to do with it, or at least that's what they said. So the story was covered by the newspapers, and the newspapers speculated that it could be a fallen satellite, which actually for this case I believe is a possibility. Major Andy Reynolds, a Defense Department spokesman, said, quote, there will be no official Defense Department investigation. I can state with certainty this object was not a pilotless aircraft or a target drone, as has been suggested. These types of aircraft are used, but not in this case, in this area. There is no attempt at a cover-up, and I'm willing to take any written accounts of the sighting. The RAAF concluded it was a meteorite, but based on witness descriptions, the idea that it was a meteorite is kind of ridiculous. If the military lost a craft, generally they're going to want it back. If an airplane crashes, people are going to go recover it and, help survivors. If it was somebody else's tech, the military's definitely going to go retrieve it. If it was a satellite owned by a government, they're going to retrieve it. Now, I didn't see witnesses in this case specifically saying that they saw a crash retrieval effort by the military, but the fact that the military is so adamantly saying, nope, not ours, we don't know what it is, we want nothing to do with it, is a little suspicious that that's what they're telling the public. It's an interesting case. I think there's a good chance it could have been some kind of man-made object, such as a top-secret Air Force craft of some kind, or an experimental missile that went off course, even a satellite that fell to the Earth. Who knows? All of these things I think are possible, but we'd have to do a deeper dive into the case for me to have a strong opinion one way or the other. Either way, it's definitely an interesting case, and I feel like it's worth looking into deeper in the future. All right, let's end with a more recent case, sort of. Hepton Hill, Cotswolds, England, October 31st, 1994. It's not that recent, but it's a lot more recent than 1947 or 1952, right? Witnesses saw a barrel-like object fall at a high speed into a field near Hepton Hill. One of the witnesses, Paul Brooke, said that it looked like a 40-gallon drum. Quote, "There were several fire engines and lots of police here. The area was cordoned off and people were stopped from entering the field. Then at about 8 that night, it was taken away by a Royal Navy vehicle with a police escort at the front and back." Mike Rowlands of the Eversham Police said, quote, "I can't categorically say that it did not happen, but my investigations have revealed that it was a bale of straw that was on fire and which was put out by the fire brigade. The reports of something falling from the sky may either be hoaxes or somebody may have seen something and come to the wrong conclusion." So the military, the military is going to go to the area with a truck, load up a smoldering bale of hay, and leave the area with a police escort. And they're going to secure the area. They're going to secure the area, keep people out and tell them you're not allowed in here over a bale of hay that's on fire. That is one of the best explanations I've ever seen. What's the process here? Did the Air Force load up a bale of hay on like maybe a cargo plane where you can open the back in flight, set it on fire, and then drop it out the back as like an experiment or a prank or something? This is a good one, man. When I was skimming through some of these, I saw this one. Like, I have to include this one just for this guy's explanation. This is more bizarre than an actual UFO sighting, right? Right? Friggin' smoldering, flaming bale of hay. Okay. Right. So yeah, they did take it away on a truck. When the military was asked about the event, they said, they said they didn't know what was going on, or in the local vernacular, they were mum, or maybe marm. I don't know. It's one of those things. That's what they say. A versatile word over there in England. They say mum for lots of different things, and one of those is to stay quiet. What was it? A magical falling bale of hay? Was it set on fire and dropped from the TARDIS? Could it have been some kind of government craft, satellite, or other asset? Could it have been a UFO? We don't know. But something happened here, and the military responded, so it's interesting at the very least. Once again, it could have been a terrestrial craft. It could have been an experimental thing that the military put there, or that crashed and whatever. Or it could be UFO. We don't have enough information at this point to make that determination. Again, I would have to do a deep dive on this one to have a strong opinion one way or the other. But it's still a really interesting case. And again, this is one of the best. I've been doing this for a long time now, and this is one of the best explanations I've ever seen for a UFO. A flaming bale of hay. That's a new one. That is a new one. It's, you got to get up pretty early in the morning to come up with an explanation that I've never heard before. I've heard everything at this point, but a flaming bale of hay. I love it, man. That's my favorite. All right. So that's all the cases I have for you today. A lot of fun cases in there, not necessarily open and shut cases, but mysterious cases where there's a lot of ambiguity, cases that could have been UFOs, or maybe they weren't. We just don't have enough information to go on. But on the other hand, I do like covering things or cases that you've never heard of before, right? I think that's a lot of fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. Apologies again for the lack of a St. Joseph UFO case. And also the lack of me finding any information whatsoever for that case did delay this case file. It was supposed to be last week, but it set it off by a week because then I had to take notes for this topic and I was behind by a week. I kept searching and searching and searching, and it's extremely rare that I find so little about a case that I've put on my list. My suspicion is that I heard about this case on the Above Top Secret forums, and I put it on my list because of that to look into further. But then the Above Top Secret forums are no longer there. Some of them are archived in the Wayback Machine. Some of them are not. And researching things on there is somewhat difficult, and I just didn't have the time to look deeper into that. So at some point I decided to cut my losses and instead, pivot to a different topic related to that. So crash retrievals instead, so that I would have a topic instead of spending yet another week digging through everything I could possibly think of and still coming up with nothing. So at least we have an episode. Apologies for that. I will put on a vote for the next topic coming up sometime today or maybe tomorrow, so that you guys can vote on our next topic, which will be next week because, I'm behind a week on this one. All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. Until next time, keep it strange.